Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Laid Off Legends podcast. I am your host, Leo, and as principal product manager that was laid off from Microsoft last year. We are excited to bring another guest to the program today. As you all know, this podcast is really about listening to layoff stories. And as folks share their stories, other tech professionals that have been laid off could find inspiration, encouragement, and direction for the next chapter ahead. So, with that, I'd like to welcome our guest, Chilumba. Chilumba, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Leo.
It's so great to see you, man. Chalumba and I go way back. For those of you in the audience, I think our first connection was at a mutual friend's wedding in the beautiful country of Zimbabwe. So shout out to all our Zimbabweans out there.
There we go. Yes, go for it.
Absolutely. So Chilumba, welcome. Why don't we just start with intros first of all, even before we get to the layoff experience. Love to just share with our audience and community who you are and what your journey's been.
All right. Who am I? I am a tech professional and also a product leader. My experience has been primarily at Microsoft with close to 2 decades of experience. In my career at Microsoft, I held various roles that included software testing, software development, compliance management, data engineering, and obviously product, which was the last role that I was in before things changed. So with that experience, I've built automation frameworks, developed the experiences in applications, built data pipelines and telemetry pipelines, designed user experiences, and then also adhered to conformance, right? So I was a compliance champ and made sure that we were compliant across the software development cycle.
So interesting. 2 decades at Microsoft. Are there any products that you worked on that our audience can know and recognize, or were you deep, deep in the belly of the tech stack?
Well, so there are a lot of products, and some of these I call out. There's some experiences as well I call out where I'll go to an electronics store. I went with one time with my dad, and I'm like, that isn't a product I worked on. So I worked on the Windows Phone and Windows Mobile experience. So that was my first foray into the product. On Windows Phone, I worked on applications. So I worked on pictures. So if you ever use a Windows Phone, took pictures, you'll have used that. I worked on the contact management. I worked also on the calculator. At some point during testing, I even owned Solitaire. So if you're using your phone and you're bored, you can play a game on the phone. But the most recent one I worked on is the Edge browser. And so then people will be more familiar with that. I also worked on HoloLens. So for all those people on augmented reality, virtual reality spaces, those are some of those experiences you'd have jumped into.
And one of the interesting things about Microsoft and a lot of these tech companies, they're so large. You could be working on this one widget or this thing, but you are impacting hundreds of millions of people. And I think that this is where, when we talk about the legends of this tech community, it's like that. It's like, oh, I'm working on this thing, but the impact is in the hundreds of millions, which is incredible.
Yeah, that is correct. And then at times, like when you're in the weed, you don't realize how much of impact you have. And then it's only when you take a step back, or well, as I was saying, I went to Best Buy and I was with my dad. And then they used to have this concept of retail demo mode. And then I was telling my dad, oh, that was me, that kind of thing. So then it's just imagine how many people, even if they don't use the product, would have probably seen some of the stuff I worked on in an actual electronics store. So that's all impact across different layers.
No, that's incredible. And it's interesting to you talk about some of the compliance and operational aspects. I think that's something that's missing in a lot of the discourse too, which is when you see a product and you're working with it, a lot of rules and stuff, the US, EU, the narrative pops in privacy and stuff like that, but there are other things that are important that need to be done.
That is correct. Compliance can take very many angles. You can be deep working closer to the lawyers, but then there's also the operation aspects. How, are we building stuff correctly? Are we following the rules? Are we able to ship the right components that will be allowed in certain country, right? So it takes very different aspects of the software development cycle. I was glad I had to experience all that and see what I liked.
That's amazing. So when were you laid off at Microsoft?
So I was laid off in January 2023.
Do you miss it? Miss the team?
I actually do. As I was blurbing out all my different experiences, Microsoft gave me that opportunity where I was able to try different technologies every few years, pivot to something completely new where I'm a newbie. And I could do that all staying in the same company without necessarily having to jump somewhere else. Yeah, I do miss the connections. Not one where I'm like, oh my God, that's the only place I want to work at, right? I still appreciate the experience to try something different.
Well, that's awesome, and I think that's one of the things benefits of a large company. You know, you get to move around, and startups too. I think that you just tend to do more with a lot less. But it's interesting too when you have that level of experience, you work across multiple products. So that's pretty awesome. And speaking of the company, you know, culture plays a big part into it. And of course, we talk about layoffs here, and you've seen the culture of the company kind of evolve
Yep.
to the point. And so as we talk about this layoff experience, I'm curious, were there things that were happening when things were normal in your journey with the company and things started to change all the way up to your layoff? As you look back, you know, what are some of the dynamics that you observed?
Having stayed at the company for a long time, there was always these two buckets we would call the old Microsoft and the new Microsoft. So I experienced the old Microsoft culture, and that was the culture where you're mostly competing against each other.
And this was the culture under Steve Ballmer that you're referring
That
to?
is correct, yes,
Okay.
under Steve Ballmer. And I know that it had a lot of negative aspects of like you competing against each other, but again, it made teams try and come up with really good solutions. But then obviously with that, there were some instances where there was duplication. And then now the new Microsoft, that was a little bit more caring Microsoft, where you get rewarded for using somebody else's, like, oh, I used this work that Leo had done before, right? And so leveraging and building on top of that. So then there became a more culture of let's work together.
I think
So
they describe it as this growth mindset. Like, let's help each other,
exactly,
let's learn. I think Satya calls it this learn it all versus know it all kind of
that is
culture.
correct.
So
Yes,
you're always learning, growing, taking risk, and we'll talk about taking risk because things have changed pretty significantly since
exactly.
then.
So yes, so there was that culture shift that was changing, and then as I was working on the different teams, you could see it. You could see it change. I want to say people became more personable. I mean, I say that even though that, like in the old Microsoft, I still have some of the closest connections I had because it was like great teams.
Hmm.
But it just felt people were a little bit more personable. People were more into culture. It wasn't always just about the product, right? And so then started liking some of those dynamics. But then there was also now the culture of they just started layoffs. And so then there was always that uncertainty, especially when there were always rumors in the paper. Experience of I was on a team that had a layoff much earlier in my career, right? But it wasn't that close. But in 2014, when they had the biggest layoff Microsoft ever had, right? I was on a team of 12. And so a manager and almost everyone except three of us managed to survive on that team. So that got close. And then there've been a bunch of other layoffs after that. So then it's more the culture of layoffs.
You use the word survive, which is really interesting because I think a lot of folks who are listening to this, to a certain extent, you have this survivor's guilt. Oh my gosh, they got laid off, I didn't. Like, and you have this feeling of combination of thank God, but at the same time, like, could it be me? What do I do? How do I respond? How did you were watching this and ultimately X number of months or years later, you had to experience this yourself. What was happening during the first layoff that you were watching?
So one of the things is I always call it as one of the saddest day at Microsoft, right? Because there were all these people who we were working on we were working on some interesting stuff. We were going to be working on new products, new experiences. So everything was going smoothly. I'll call it smoothly. And then all of a sudden, like everyone got canned. There were some people who had just gotten, like, let's say, a new house. There was one person who had been in a bicycle injury and he was in bandages. It was just so many layers. There was some person who had just bought like this huge vacation and it was a non-refundable. But there was just some of those experiences where some people are trying to wonder, how am I going to tell my spouse? And it was that I cried with other people. Well, because we all decided let's have lunch after they had gotten their information, and it was one of the saddest lunches. So now trying to say bye, yeah, that was tough. That was tough. And so I
Well,
called it
definitely.
survive because it was more of everyone else did not. The majority of the team did not. And then the three of us who remained were now trying to figure out, like, what do we do next? Because again, as I say, in this instance, my manager was also part of that impact. So
Wow.
now we were managerless. And so it's like trying to figure out what do we do next. And then
Now fast forward to X, months between that experience and your layoff. How long was that time period?
so that's about, I guess, almost 9 years later.
Okay, so wow. So that's enough time to bake, settle, almost even forget the experience. You're doing your thing, and then these things start to happen. So before your layoff, were there things you observed? You're like, okay, something's happening here. Like this thing, maybe I'm reading something in the news. So 9 years ago, I'm seeing the same signals, or was it completely different out of the blue? Just curious how things start to happen before your news landed.
So before my news, like I'll say a couple of months before that, there had been a layoff. And yet again, and I'm going to use the word survived because on that layoff, my manager at the time was impacted. And so got a new manager and thought that those layoffs are done, but it's almost like 2 months later it happened. Now, what were there any signals? Not really, but there had been rumors, right? And then also like there had been leaks, right? I do not believe it. Like leaks are terrible. Leaks are terrible for the business. We always say loose lips sink ships, right? But it was this in this instance, it was the rumor helped prep me to start thinking, okay, what if this is true? What do I do? So
Where did the
as much
rumors
as
come from? Was this online? Were you just, in the cafeteria? Like, again, were people working from home?
Yeah, so it was both online, but I mean it started off in that anonymous employee app Blind, so that it kept on brewing, building up, and then after that, one of the news sites got a leak that this was going to happen, right? And so then they published it. Obviously, the company couldn't confirm nor deny, and then I think the night before there was one of the big sites where they say it's Microsoft has confirmed that there's going to be a big, and they communicated what numbers they were going to be. And then and that morning, then saw an email from Satya about how there were going to be some changes at the company and that people who were going to be impacted will know over the course of time. Some people would know as soon as today, but I think it was a timeline like between January and April,
Mm.
which was a terrible way to to kind of like leave it hanging. I always believe like do it once, get it done, move on, right?
Yeah, so because part of it, there's the experience, but then there's also like the suspense. It's like, okay, what's going to happen? And then, we began the conversation around culture. Culture changes when you're looking over your shoulder. Culture
That is
changes when you're afraid of making mistakes, or you go out of your way to not say you don't know how to do. So it gets really, really interesting when the people start to think, oh my gosh, am I going to get laid off? And so this happens. You see the email from Satya, you log in the morning, right? Do you see an invite? Like,
So for me, I wasn't a remote guy, so I would go into the office. So whenever the news publication had said it, then in the morning at home, I looked just trying to see what was happening.
you
And
had
then
no idea that this could happen.
and I think it's also one of those things where it's happened several times. And then also like my performance was great. And then we were working on my documentation for the next level, even though it was now with a new manager, but regardless, we were going the
So
right
things are
direction.
fine. Like, hey,
Exactly,
things are
right?
jamming. Working on the next version. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And then also at the time, I was running one of the biggest priorities for the organization, which was security conformance to an executive order on cybersecurity.
Wow.
So then at
Was
that
this the
point,
big one that came out of the Biden administration about Microsoft was not secure, and then Satya kicked off the security initiative? Is that
yeah, so this one was just right before Satya kicked off the initiative. And so maybe we were the ones who were trying to figure out exactly what we were going to do. Perhaps there wasn't much progress across the company, but on our team we were kind of hammering, and then we were also finding issues in central teams. We're
because
doing great
it
stuff.
sounds like there's a lesson here, which is things could be going great. You could be doing amazing, and then suddenly, so that doesn't make you immune from the layoff experience.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And so you know, uh, so the email. Then I decided that I wasn't going to look at email. Continued like my routine, eat breakfast, drive in, and waited until I got into my office. And so it's actually funny. It's like I swiped my badge and I was like, oh, it worked. Right. Got into the building. And I laugh about this because I know like the way other companies handled it. There was some story online where people had lined up and then they were swiping their badge. And then it's like if it beeps, then they know they're in, and if it
Oh
doesn't,
my
then they know they're
goodness!
going, right?
Wow.
And so I think that was on my mind too. Swiped, went in, and then when I got into my office, logged in, and then noticed that I had invitation to an important business update. And so then I opened that invitation and tried to see the list. And then I was like, wait, it's not everyone on my team, but the majority of people on my team. It was select people. I was like, okay, so my manager is not invited to this meeting. So it was just, I knew what was going to happen, right? At that point, important business update, and it was going to, and it was going to be ran by our corporate vice president. So I knew exactly what was going to happen.
That's interesting. And so, folks listening, Microsoft, there are a lot of hierarchies, but CVPs or corporate vice presidents normally tend to run large business groups, and so they're very, very senior leaders, especially in the overall hierarchy. And then Microsoft is a very large company. A lot of the tech companies that we are talking to are very large, and so there are a lot of these. To have a senior leader like that, it's unusual because normally a lot of that would be an all hands meeting. So to have that unique in a smaller subset, that's definitely one that will make you pause.
So received that business update, and I knew exactly what was happening. I think at that point, I was prepared. I was more like, bring it on.
Wow. Okay. Now that's interesting. So how'd you get there, man? Like, how did you get there to the? Because again, like you were doing great. Like, hey, everything's fine, but you got this unexpected invite. But mentally, you were like, all right, bring it. Let's get through this.
Yeah, when that experience happened a few months to my manager, and at that point, like in the December timeframe during the holidays, right after the World Cup, right, I had a chance to sit down and kind of try to figure out, like, okay, what if this happened to me?
Mm.
And so then trying to figure out, like, okay, will the mortgage be paid? Will I still have money for groceries? All that kind of thing, like mapped it out, right? And
So
then,
you prepare. You saw this happening to other people. So I think this is powerful. And you said, I have to get ready. This may happen to me.
right. Because like it's happened so many times around me, but then it was now that angle is like, what if? I mean, at times we are always in that mindset, like, oh, it happens to everyone, but not me. But then this time I was like, what if? And so I did all these numbers and like, I should be fine. Right. Again, it's more also coming from an angle of privilege. So I know not everyone can just dismiss it like that. That's the position I was in.
Yeah.
So then when that meeting came, I was like, bring it on.
So you received the layoff news. Do you like, I mean, do you shut down your laptop and like say everybody deuces? Like, how did you, 2 decades at the company, you have some very deep relationships, you've worked some very important things. How did you handle that exit?
So what Microsoft did, they were generous in the sense that it wasn't like your position has been terminated, exit right now. We were given about, I think it was a week, where in that week we still had corporate access, we still had building access, and then that way we could wrap up, and or if we have anything personal we can take. And also there was the option where the full-time job, even if it happened, there were 2 months where I would still be an employee, could still continue with the benefits and all. But my full-time job that time, if I wish to pursue it, was to find another role at
Okay,
Microsoft.
you got in, bring it on. You said a sense of confidence. Did you start handing off your work, or did you like, all right, guys, I'm done?
When I jumped into the meeting, the organization leader, he was reading from a prompt. It was impersonal. It was like, well, according to today, your position has been eliminated. And then, I mean, there was an HR person. And then what is funny was there was a colleague of mine. It was a Teams meeting, a virtual meeting. So it wasn't like everyone gathering in a room. He had his camera on. And he was just laughing. I mean, he's on mute, but he's laughing. You're seeing his expression, just thinking. So then I sent him a message. I was like, hey, do you know that your camera is on? And he goes, yep, this is funny. So he took it a different way. He's laughing. So it was an experience. HR was there too. So they spoke about it. Not many people had their cameras on. The people who had their cameras on, I think either they were kind of like me, where it's like, bring it on, because you didn't see them panic. Like there wasn't like any expression or sadness or anything like that. It was just, they looked like, at some point it looked like, oh, there was some of the managers maybe who were listening in to the information being delivered, but later on found out, because I was in the group with the senior people, like I guess they had two meetings. That's why not everyone in my team was there, right? There were some junior level people who had another meeting, so that I guess the instructions were different. So right after the meeting, because we were told like, you can go home, You don't have to finish any work. And actually, we didn't have to do any handoff. I had been documenting the stuff I was doing, right? So then I had given links to my manager and everything. But one of the shares that I had documents to, I immediately lost access. And as I said, I was running security compliance, so then I knew exactly why I lost access on that one. I was in the security grouping, which has access to source code. So obviously, then they're like, oh, let me try to see it to prove it. And indeed, my source code access was revoked. This is policy. That way, people don't steal intellectual property. So then one of the things I did, obviously looked at my calendar, trying to ensure that I clear off any meetings. And then there was a meeting. So I usually had a monthly meeting with one of the senior leaders in the organization. And so it was coming up. What I did was I sent that leader a message saying, hey, I'm going to be canceling a meeting. And it's not like I don't want to meet you. It's just that I was part of people who were impacted. And so then that senior leader immediately replied and say, are you in the office? I was like, yeah. And then the leader told me like, okay, do you mind swinging by? So, I mean, when I sent that message, I knew what I was doing, right? I could have just canceled it and not care, but also it's like, I have great relationships as I like, it's been a great experience. My experience was a lot more positive than than people might assume. I'm not going to mention their name, but one of the first things they said when I walked in was like, okay, this conversation is off the record. I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was like, no, no, this conversation we're having is off the record. And so then that's when they kind of shared that when they found out, I think a few days before, but it was just they found out. It wasn't like it was a space where they can say like, oh, let's move people off and all that other stuff. And so it was a great feeling because what that leader had asked me was like, they asked me a couple of questions. First is like, it goes, are you done with Edge, kind of the group I was in? And in that question, it was more like if there was a job which will open in Edge, would you still want to work in Edge? I was like, oh yeah, I would. And then also then the other question was, are you done with Microsoft? And so I was like, I would still take on something if there was, and in which they shared saying that there were no positions in the Edge. And so then they wanted to understand so that they could help me land somewhere. So they wanted to figure out like how much they send out that bad signal through their networks. And so at that time, as I said, since I had prepared, I had wanted to do the option of the getting the severance and stepping away. And so then what I did is I told them that can I hold that favor in case, for later on.
It's such a human experience. I think that the business decision of the layoff is the business decision. How it's handled is what people remember. Your badge just didn't work and you're standing outside in the cold. Like, hang on, I've been with this company, blood, sweat, and tears. I've missed birthdays and holidays to be here. You're pushed out that way versus there's a very human experience and that's what you remember. I remember my experience too. There was the reading of the document, which was cold, same experience. And again, there's the legal and empathy to the leader in the sense of, yeah, okay, I've got to read this. But the chillingness of it is what really hits you. It's what happened afterwards. And he said thank you. And this is a leader that I've worked for and worked very hard for. And he shared his appreciation, said, hey, if I can help with anything, please let me know. And I think that those are the moments in those traumatic moments where you're like, you remember everything. You're like, despite all this, and you have disillusionment and the anger and the disappointment and everything, but then there's like, okay, there is a human moment here that I'll also take away that's incredibly valuable. So again, kudos to that leader that he actually took the time to reach out to you and share a human moment, which I think is really powerful.
And then also it wasn't just like it was a senior leader because even my immediate leadership chain, they were supportive, they were courteous, and they
Hmm.
were like, let me know how I can help. If I see any positions, I'll send them your way.
I will say this, like your experience is unique. There are others who, like our previous interviewer, it was almost like people were avoiding talking to her. And it was like, your colleagues don't know how to approach or how to experience this. Hey, don't get your layoff juice on me. Like it's a very awkward social experience. And then so how do you kind of deal with it? So it's in these human moments that you kind of experience. So what you're describing is unique.
So I mean, I did have some of those moments. There was a dev manager that I was working with, and when I bumped into them, I think it was in the hallway or in the kitchen, and you could tell they were kind of uncomfortable. And I mean, they are naturally awkward, but this one was another level. You could see that it was more avoidance. It's probably they didn't know what to say, or I don't know. Maybe there's some of that survivor's guilt, and they maybe I don't know. Right. When I experienced that, and some other person also kind of had waved at me more from a distance, but they continued walking. So then at that point, I made it a point to, when I was clearing out my office, I tried to let's go at lunch when people are on lunch break, or
Mhm.
go after hours, so I'm not bumping into people.
Interesting. So you
Yeah.
had this like, okay, look, I need to avoid people right now. Let me
Right.
just pick my connections, but like I want to bounce. I want to leave.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So that's what I did. I was going to give in, for example, like my laptop, and the admin was, I want to say emotional, but it wasn't like tears. And then they came and she hugged me for the longest time, and then she goes like, "This is not goodbye, right?" You're like, "Oh, cool," So
Again, these human things, this is, a great lesson because we have folks who are listening who have been laid off, but other folks like, yeah, considering being laid off or they see from, because many times people won't know that you've been laid off, and so for me, it was very important to tell people what happened, not they hear something that's altered or like, oh, this, no, 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 no. I need to tell you that I was laid off. My position was eliminated.
yeah, yeah, and I did that too.
Yeah, it
When you
does
were
feel
asking like what I did, I sent an email, right?
so. Did you BCC everybody, or did you just like, yo, everybody, like, here's what's happened?
Well, I mean, I BCC'd some groupings. Definitely was directed, like, also like to the Edge organization, and so
You had roots there, man. You had worked there for a really long time.
right, and so then I also blind copied some of my previous managers who are still at the company. Some of my mentors. I did that, and like because I love to jest, so even my bye bye email was like
Yeah,
humor.
you're cracking jokes in your.
Yeah, I'm cracking jokes because I was like, okay, thank you for the cookies. And the cookies part is always like, maybe we're in a meeting and something like that, and the team wants some work delivered. I was like, well, if I have a cookie, I'll approve it, that kind of thing. It's just, I always jest like that, and
Interesting.
I bring humor into different situations.
Wait,
And
hold
so,
up. Is there an inside joke there with Edge and cookies, like browser
no, no,
cookies?
no, no,
Okay,
no.
I was
You're,
asking, wait,
you're
is it related to your
overthinking it.
story?
You're overthinking it, but that's pretty good, though.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
no,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
No,
So
I mean,
okay, so
again, it was almost part of that reference. Thank you for the fish. But I
yeah.
mean, but if you use that reference, it's almost like you're saying that I'm exiting and everything is going to explode, right? Everything is going to get damaged. But this one was more of just, I wanted to use that catchy line, but thank you for the cookies.
It's no, it's great. I think your exit was graceful. It felt, as you're describing, it feels quite smooth. So now there's the unknown, the unexpected, because you've been doing this for over almost 20 years, you said. And then, so there's identity. As you're processing this, and then you said you were more prepared. It wasn't a surprise. But now you're in this unexpected, unknown kind of valley. Who are you? What do you do? Like, so how did you cope, once you stopped going to work? What were your days like at that point? And let's do this. Let's like some time. Like, so let's do the first couple weeks after, and then let's kind of go through that timeline as things continue to get, further and further down the line.
So for me, one of the things I did, like after the layoff happened, I knew that I wasn't going to start looking from that day onwards. And what I did is I went on an international trip. So went to Asia, and then also the fact that I didn't have to come back for work, then I even extended my outing. Right. So then I was able, coming from an angle of privilege from that, it's like not everyone can just take off and not worry about it. I was able to do that, and then kind of forget about what happened, and just obviously I couldn't immediately forget. There was still that idea. It's like, oh wait, when I go back,
Yeah,
I
life
won't,
still continues. Yeah.
right, life will still continue. So when I came back, then the first intake in my mind was, I just need to find a job, and it was just not necessarily that I should immediately jump for a job. It was just an instinct. And then also, like everyone else would, every time they would talk to me, they'll be like, "Have you found a job yet? Have you found a job yet?" Um, But then I was also doing a few social interactions with folks, and one of the things I struggled with was explaining who I am. Like how you started off with tell me about yourself. If it was a few weeks after that, I would have been struggling to say that because for whatever reason, I always associated what my profession is to Microsoft. And so for almost 2 decades, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a software engineer at Microsoft. And so now I did not have something I'm latching to. And so then there was that. And then it took a bit of time for me to figure out how I explain this. I mean, somebody would tell me like you don't have to think about it, overthink it, but I did because Microsoft was my identity for a while. Like everyone, still even when people are cracking jokes, they'll be like, Windows Phone, Microsoft, like if when I'm interacting with different colleagues. So there was that piece. And then also the other stuff is like I'm an investor. Like I've invested in different asset classes, and so I started playing with the idea of calling myself I'm a businessman, right? But then it was also a little bit like I didn't like that because then it just it's like what does that mean?
And this struggle to define what you do or who you are, did that prevent you from meeting other people? Did it like hold you back? Like I'm just curious because in the American culture, it is kind of like the one of the first two, three questions when you meet somebody. What's your name? What do you do for a living? It's so core to how we introduce ourselves
Right.
that man, when you don't have a clear answer or you struggle to identify or you're embarrassed with the answer, it's tough. It's tough to go out.
I did not try to avoid people because of that. So as I said, like for a while, I kept on trying to play with the idea, but I'll be like, I'm a, I'm a former Microsoft engineer, former, So there were instances where at times, if I insert Microsoft, then people validate me or take me seriously. There was always that thing because there was the perception. It's like, oh wow, Microsoft hires the best and brightest, so this guy must be bright, right? And so there was always that prefix out probably put.
Which even that narrative affects how you handle the layoff and the let go because something that was so powerful in reaffirming your identity is no longer there. And so who are you without that external validation, which is
Exactly.
a as simple as that is, that's a very deep question for a lot of us, especially when you worked so hard to get there. And the validation, once you're there, continues to be reinforced with every conversation you have.
Exactly. So then I had the self branding exercise, and I know you had helped me in trying to form my narrative of who I am. Like, well, you are a professional in this space, so doesn't mean because you're not with Microsoft, therefore you're no longer that professional. So it's one of those things, I always say I'm a software engineering professional because I did software engineering, I did product, and then I also pulled in about the product lead. I was a leader in the product space. And so I still see myself as that.
So, in this identity kind of reformulation and this journey, how were you finding inspiration from other places? You mentioned taking some time off. What were you doing at the time? Gazing into the stars, writing poetry, like watching football? What were you doing that helped manage this new, for lack of a better word, void or space that you now have?
Well, so let's see. I didn't all of a sudden have just tons of free hours. Yes, I was traveling and I got to do I also it happened. This layoff happened at the time. It was like after I had lost my last living parent, like my father had passed, right? And so then uh, I had to untangle the estate. And my father was in Zambia in southern Central Africa. So then I want to say it gave me time, but then I was able to focus some of that energy in untangling the estate because some things I want to say in Africa, but even here, an estate entanglement is very complicated and it's not one thing where you just hit a button and you're done. It's got just so many layers to it. So I was able to do that. One of the other parts is like I called out that I'm an investor in real estate, and it was a chance to also automate a lot of the stuff that is happening. A lot of stuff which takes my time. Finally got a property manager so that now I'm not doing a lot of the running around. So So then I was able to use that time to do some of that work. And then, I mean, there's the part I always say, like a lot of my friends say that I'm a planner, like I'm an avid planner. So as I was doing stuff for the job hunt, one of the things I did is like, I set up an Azure ADO, right? Azure where I create an epic and create a code name for this project. Like I call it gig scouting. It's like job finding, but I
Yep.
use
So
terms that
you're using the skills of DevOps in your job hunt. This is again very interesting.
uh,
It leads me to my next question around skills. Were there skills or strengths that you were able to discover about yourself throughout this layoff experience and even after that you didn't know you had? Can you share a little bit more about these things that you're tapping into now that you may have used in the past or you just discovered they were there, they were untapped?
Yeah, so the skills that I was using, like project management, I was actually even pretty detailed. I had an epic, and then I had the different parts, like if resume update, then I had the work items, like create a template so that, if I'm tailoring my resume, create a template for a cover letter. And then I had also another high level work item, which was training. And then, it's like
Wow, that's impressive.
if I take training, I need to document it. But also, it was one of those so that I could, like, if I could say how many roles did I apply or how much training did I do, did I complete it, and stuff like that. I'm honest to myself, right? This is not a project that I'm exposing or sharing with everyone. Look, but that's just how I operate. Some of the other skills that I brought in is the whole objective and key results. I've been using that because I know I don't set New Year's resolutions. So then I use the OKR framework to determine what are the things for this year where I want to move the needle. I've got 4 different categories. I call it health, because we all can be healthy. Self, and so for self, which includes harnessing some of my relationships and everything. And then we also have time. We need time for ourselves. So health, self, wealth. We got to manage our wealth. We got to manage, figure out to make how we save. We can all save more. We can all invest more. Can be wise with our investment. And then the 4th category, which didn't rhyme with health, self, wealth, was career. And it was okay, it didn't rhyme. So then I used the OKR framework to do that, and I score them every quarter.
That's
And
fantastic. That's
so,
incredible, man.
right. And
Yeah.
again, I'm honest with myself. There were the times where I had reds, like, oh, because I had wanted to apply to certain number of positions. But you know what? It was at the time when I was traveling and everything like that. So it overlapped. So then I'm not going to say, like, oh, it's on track. It's like I did it. I didn't do that. And it's okay. As I said, I use those skills down on that framework to do some of that work.
No, I love the journey, first of all, and then also how you're managing your strengths. So today's magic, what are you doing right now? And I would like to say, like, what are you doing? What are you doing on your piece of the planet right now?
Like, what am I doing?
Hmm?
What keeps me busy? Oh, well, so I've invested, like, so I'm an investor in different asset classes, which even includes tertiary or university education. And then I've also in the spirits business, specifically whiskey. So some of those investments at times, then if I have investor relations, so then I do that. Then there's also another organization, it's called GSI, Global Seed Initiative. And so for that, I'm on the board, and their journey has been to introduce regenerative farming in Africa. So this is making sure that we're like sustainable land use. So then I've been exposed to this space that I'm learning about. There are people from different backgrounds, so they do that. And then I also take trainings. AI is a buzzword. AI is something that I've been trying to get deep into. I was exposed to AI through the data. I'm familiar with the different models. I have, had previously done EDX courses and stuff like that. But then this is now the time was like with large language models. It's like, yeah, let me learn a little bit about that. I mean, it's like I was exposed to it, but now it's like I can see them in action. And we're like, okay, let me go deep and try and understand that. So I'm doing that as well. I'm still traveling. I have one more trip, which is scheduled in 19 days. I think it's in 19 days. And so
Very
I'm doing
exciting.
that. Managing properties, because I mean, also like I think for the like under the wealth tenant, one of the parts is also like to make the rental piece efficient. So then I'm still active in that, and because I wanted to fully automate that And when I say automate, where things are only escalated to me when it can't be handled.
I love the framework, how you took these professional things you learned, the OKR framework, the dev framework, the DevOps framework, the project management framework, and are now applying it and making your post corporate life smoother, more efficient. And then ultimately, again, as you invest in like the training component in that career, do you bring AI into some of your real estate investment kind of things? The GSI, so exploring board leadership, I think that's another post layoff opportunity. That's really incredible to see you kind of do that. So, man, that's awesome, man. What a journey. That's incredible.
Right. So yeah, I am busy. Obviously, I carve out time to watch Manchester United play.
I wish like I was a fan of another Premier League team, so I could like just all right, great, but no, Man U it has its
I think
place.
you're an honorary Arsenal fan, and then now, but yeah, now I get it.
I love it. Rapid fire questions, my friend. And before we wrap, all right, your go-to advice for someone on day one of their layoff.
Day one of the layoff, take a step back. Take a step back because obviously it's a lot of information that is coming, but take a step back so that you can consume it all. Because I think you might be making a lot of decisions while under some different emotional level.
Great feedback. Advice to that you would give to others who've been laid off recently.
The main part for me is don't feel sorry for yourself because there's always that part now you start doubting yourself. It's like, why me? Was I laid off because I didn't do this? Could I have done this? Most of these are business decisions. So don't be there feeling sorry for yourself. It's like it's a business decision. Kind of pick yourself up and try and move on.
One tool or resource you wish you knew about sooner.
So I'll say LinkedIn Learning. I knew about it, but I didn't really dig into it to that level, and I only started using it later on. So even when I'm talking about the trainings, then I'm able to use that. There's also this feature if you've got the LinkedIn Premium subscription, you're able to export the data and do some analysis. And so, yeah, that's something that I wish I knew about earlier. Like, "Hey, I need to apply to jobs on a Monday versus on a Sunday or something."
The most valuable skill you've learned throughout this entire experience.
Patience. And I say patience as much as I didn't talk about the number of times I've been applying to places. It's just the market has been pretty bad. And so the turnaround from companies is not as fast. And then even when they set up the interviews and all that other stuff, they're not as quick. So you just have to exercise patience.
Great feedback. Chilumba, thank you. In the richness of this conversation, again, we're just getting started with this journey. You mentioned you had some questions for me.
Yeah. So I mean, so on top of my mind is more. So what is the legacy play for League of Layoffs? How do you envision legacy for this?
The laid off legends, I think it's a journey. It's a journey that I'm taking personally, having been laid off. And as I connect with others, not just around, in the tech community, but around the world, it's so interesting where we are as a tech community, but also as a society overall. And tech normally tends to lead because, we're building the technology. And so we will see this cascade, in terms of layoffs. But right now, it's really just in tech. For me, one of the most important things is that just as I have found resilience and I have found a sense of purpose and a sense of being able to help and contribute to others, my hope is that this resource can do the same for others. And I think that it starts with the personal aha moment. And whether that's before your layoff, like you and I, or at the layoff itself, where the layoff actually frees you to do the things that you've always wanted to do. So one of the things, and we're building this framework called the Forge framework, where before you start looking for the role, there is a personal in-depth discovery, a skills and assets inventory, where you actually have to dig deep because a layoff it'll shake your confidence. Even though you're told this is a business decision, like, no, you will go through a place of shame. You will feel isolated. You won't know how to talk about it. And you mentioned some of those. And I think that folks should not go through that alone. And
Yep.
so as I continue to build this out, I'm starting to form a vision around reaching 1,000 people, having 1,000 success stories, big enough to be like to stretch, but small enough to stretch, but big enough to be like, okay, great, that's a lot of people, right? And through the podcast, through the social media outreach, to the Slack channel, but we really want to help people transition through this experience, build resilience, find a community of people that can help you through this. And then if we can, in any small way, help reconnect you to your purpose. If you really do want to go back out there and corp, that's fine. But we're talking to people, hey, this has helped me become a chef. This has helped me dig deeper and become a board member. This has helped me become a better parent. And we'll bring all those folks onto the podcast that can actually share their stories and inspire others. So that's what I look at as the legacy of this. If we can touch a life through those means, it will be time well spent.
Yeah. No, so like, I'm proud of you for doing this. I need to give you flowers while you're still running with this. Because, I mean, we all usually have ideas in the shower, but I'm proud that you were able to get this shot. Maybe it wasn't a shower idea, but get this idea and we were able to play with it and put it in motion. So that's great stuff, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. Chilumba, thank you for the time. Man, it's such a great experience. Your journey hopefully has inspired others. And this is why we started these to help let the setback be the beginning of the comeback. And your journey is definitely a powerful reminder that these types of things can actually set us up for greater things. And so to our listeners, you'll be able to find this on YouTube, on of course the podcast. If this was helpful, we'll have all this information in the show notes. Please like, subscribe, share this with friends. And one more thing, if you have others who have been laid off as well, you would love to hear their story. If you go to the website under our resources, is a place where you can actually submit a podcast guest or a podcast topic. Season 1 is focused on mental health. So we're really helping, equipping people with the things that they need to get them through this. And we'll continue to bring other topics as well. So feel free to head over to the leagueoflayofflegends.com and you'll be able to find that and many more resources. So with that, thank you for the time today. Chilumba, thank you again.
Thank you for having me, Leo.
Thank you so much. And so folks, from the Laid Off Legends podcast, see you next time. And thank you so much. Bye, everyone.